single day, like I've always done and always will.
Passing these bills on the floor, making yet another stand.
Welcome to this week's edition of New York Now. I'm Elise Klein. This year's fiscal year 2026 state budget included $136 million in funding for a decarbonization project for the Empire State Plaza. The project aims to reduce emissions through installed electric and heat recovery chillers to power the Empire State Plaza. It will be implemented through 4 phases. The first phase, which was fully funded this year, will take about 5 years. We sat down with the Commissioner of the New York State Office of General Services, Jeanette Moy, to discuss the project's emission goals, the implementation process, and the state's climate objectives. Here's that conversation. Thank you so much for joining us today, Commissioner.
Oh, thank you so much for having me here, Elise.
So tell me a little bit about the advocacy for pushing for this project. How long have you been advocating for it? And, what kind of led up to this final funding phase, and how do you feel now that phase 1 has been funded?
I'm really excited. So I've been commissioner now coming up on 4 years, and this was one of the first projects that we took on. Governor Hochul was very focused on decarbonization, and obviously when we're thinking about greenhouse gas emissions, there are 2 main contributors, right? It's buildings and it's transportation. And she wanted to make sure that we were looking at all of our projects and our portfolios writ large. So this project, this work around the Empire State Plaza, originated as an energy study. So the New York Power Authority and the Office of General Services had been focused on how do we look at some of the reductions in energy usage at the plaza. And we slowly, as we started to dive into this work, when I first arrived, we started focusing more on decarbonization. Is it possible? And especially as DL15, a Decarbonization Leadership Council, had been created underneath the governor, we started really focusing on that opportunity to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Now, this project, this first phase, which will help us to get to 21% reductions in the Albany region, is now fully funded. And so huge excitement within our agency. Last year, the governor had announced $100 million using Environmental Bond Act funding. We also got $5 million also that was set aside through the Public Facilities Sustainability Funds as well. So this last tranche of money is going to allow us to fully decarbonize about 21% here in the downtown region. So we're very excited about it.
So tell me why the Empire State Plaza. What was the inspiration behind this project?
This is 98 acres of space in the downtown Albany region, right? This is about almost 12 million square feet of improved commercial space. It's an opportunity for us to lead by example. This is a complicated infrastructure. This is something that there's been advocacy within the community to look at some of the complex infrastructure in downtown Albany for quite some time. Whether you are someone who lives in Sheridan Hollow and in the Arbor Hill areas, folks have been thinking about particularly that Sheridan Avenue steam plant. It's been around since the 1900s. It started off burning coal. It became a cogeneration plant as the plaza was created. And this is an environmental justice opportunity for us to look at reductions of greenhouse gas emissions, again, right here in downtown Albany. So it's a win for the community. It's a win in terms of our agency and ensuring that our infrastructure is best structured and best supported. So it's great for everyone, and I'm really proud of the governor and our administration for moving this forward.
And what is the implementation process going to look like? How many buildings will be impacted? How long will this take? Walk me through what this is going to look like in terms of actually achieving it.
So there are 4 phases that are a part of the full decarbonization, right? So our first phase of work, which brings us to 21% reduction, includes looking at electric chillers for the Sheridan Avenue area, right? So we have a air conditioning plant that exists underneath the concourse, and we'll be looking at additional chillers. Those are in design right now. We'll also be looking at heat recovery chillers. So there's heat that's generated when you're thinking about this significant infrastructure. We're going to repurpose that heat, bring it right back into the plaza. This is going to require that we look at some of the air handling units. It requires that we start breaking into walls, and that will allow us to really, again, reduce our emissions by 21%. That's going to be done within the next 5 years, right? So we're really excited about that first phase of work. As we look towards the second phase, that is looking at the movement of the Biggs laboratory out to the Harriman campus. That results in a 52% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, right? And so when we think about about that laboratory, it's built right in the base of Corning Tower. It's really inefficient. So when we think about what it was intended for, that office space, as opposed to the laboratory that was created, it requires negative air pressure. It's a significant drain. So as it goes to modern, more purpose-built space out at Harriman campus, it allows us to reduce those emissions. It'll happen within the next 10 years. As we look to the third phase of work, 92% reduction, that requires that we're looking at either some combination of geothermal, and that's a conversation between the New York Power Authority and the city of Albany. We're looking also at potentially looking at repurposing some of the excess heat from wastewater treatment plants. That's a conversation with the county. And so right now, there are active conversations between the New York Power Authority and those two municipal entities to figure out what's the right single source or more likely combination of sources in order to support the load and need of the Empire State Plaza. We anticipate that feedback is going to happen next year. So, all of this is going to be pretty significant changes taking place in Albany, and we're looking forward to getting started.
And what are the goals of this project overall? I know you had mentioned that in phase one will be achieve about 21% of reducing the capital region's emission reduction.
So it's the greenhouse gas reductions for the Empire State Plaza. And so, this allows us to be able to, as we think about, clean energy grid, as we think about some of the changes that are taking place, this is all about reducing the greenhouse gas emissions that are produced by our infrastructure itself. Now, through the decarbonization leadership efforts, the DL15 efforts, there are 15 campuses in the state of New York that have some of the highest emitting campuses in terms of their usage of greenhouse gases. Unfortunately, OGS oversees two of them, right? So one of them is the Empire State Plaza, the other one being Harriman. We are the first ones out the gates to have a decarbonization plan. We are the first ones out the gates to really push some of these efforts. We are showing that it is possible to do great and big things while also restoring the capital city for the Albany region, which incredibly proud of those activities. And, there's a lot of construction that's happening right now in the plaza. If you drive through it, I'm sure you've seen it yourself, whether it is the work that we're doing around the eastern approach and restoring those stairs, or it's the activities happening on the arterial to ensure that the roadways are maintained and safe and available. These are all things that OGS is focused on, and I think is a real investment, again, back to our capital region.
And how does this project fit into the state's overall climate reduction or emission reduction goals? Will this help us catch up to the goals that we're currently a little bit behind on?
Absolutely. And so, I think, number one, this is real demonstrable progress, right? And I think that we have a great plan for that first phase. This is, when we're thinking about greenhouse gas emissions, there are two major areas. It's transportation and it's buildings. And buildings are complicated, particularly when we're talking about the infrastructure at the size and scale that's here in the Empire State Plaza. This also partners with the work that we're doing around converting the state's vehicles, right? So the other part of OGS is also looking at the conversion of the state fleets, the light-duty vehicles, by 2035, all medium and heavy by 2040. And so again, we looked into the data, we created a plan that made sense, we've publicly provided information about that transition, and we're continuing to advance that on behalf of the governor and the state.
Can you tell me a little bit about what the next steps look like in terms of getting phase two funded? I know that phase one is going to be about 5 years, but sometimes it takes multiple years to get something in a final state budget.
Oh, absolutely. And so, so the second phase does require the completion of Wadsworth Laboratories out in Harriman. So we'll be paying attention to that construction schedule. We'll start planning for the retrofit of the space as it starts to exit. That third phase of work, which is probably the lion's share of activities, does require that we are looking at, again, geothermal opportunities. We're looking at the wastewater treatment site. And so once we start to dig into those activities, we'll know a little bit more around what those costs might look like, what that schedule might look like. So next year is going to be a very big one for us. We are, of course, having conversations with the Division of Budget, with the Executive Chamber, with our great colleagues in the legislature.
And do you think the cuts at the federal level will have any sort of impact on your ability to get additional funding for the secondary phases?
That's a great question. And so, look, it is important that this work is taking place for a variety of reasons. When we think about this first set of work, There's a lot that has to happen right now. We are fully funded. It allows us to also continue with the design work as we think through the next sets of activities. I think this is a commitment that the governor has. These are all also capital dollars. These are long-term investment dollars that are happening right here in the region that does need to transform. There's a lot of new residents that are coming into the region. I'm one of them. Moved into the area within the last couple of years with my family, and we want to make sure that we are not just ensuring that the space is appropriate and adequate of a public space for all that have been living here, but also that as new industry builds up, that we're retaining those individuals and those families. So this is an important long-term investment. The federal funding is obviously very complicated. And, I think these are conversations that we all have to have around the future of this funding. Climate change is real. These challenges that we need to adapt to are very important. And focusing on this element, decarbonization, when it comes to buildings and transportation, and particularly these large complexes, we can't step back from it. I think the governor has been very much committed to this work, and it will continue to move forward underneath this administration.
And another looming change here is executive leadership. There is a gubernatorial race coming up. And so if there is potentially a change in the governor and who's leading the state, what does that mean for this project? And how important is it to have executive leadership on your side here?
I think the governor has been very clear about leading by example. And I think that one of the things I've appreciated about this work, and I've been in the public sector for quite some time now, is that this is important self-evident work, right? We are creating a infrastructure and a set of projects that are meaningful. They relate back to our communities when we think about affordability, when we think about livability. These are projects that really need to happen. They're important for the Albany community writ large. And, the underinvestment in our infrastructure just results in deterioration. And that's something where, we've been very blessed, from my perspective, to have a governor who's been supportive of us addressing our infrastructure, ensuring that we're focusing on these areas. I would expect that this continues on. And I think Governor Hochul has been a really great partner for our agency. And I'm looking forward to that continuing for the next few years.
Well, unfortunately, that's all the time we have for today. I want to thank you for taking the time to sit down with us today, Commissioner.
Oh, thank you so much for giving us an opportunity to speak. And I really look forward to maybe giving you a tour sometime of the infrastructure.
And we were speaking with New York State Office of General Services Commissioner Jeanette Moy.
Thank you.
During the most recent legislative session, state lawmakers pushed for a bill called the Beauty Justice Act that intends to ban certain toxic chemicals in cosmetic products. If enacted, the legislation would prohibit manufacturers from the distribution or sale of any cosmetic products containing restricted substances defined by the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation as an intentionally added ingredient. The types of toxic chemicals restricted would be asbestos, formaldehyde, benzene, parabens, and more. In this next segment, we dive into the bill's history in the Capitol, the regulations at the federal level, and the impact of toxic chemicals on consumers. Here's that story. Currently in the United States, there are no laws requiring the Federal Drug Administration to approve cosmetic products and ingredients before they go on the market. Only about a dozen states in the nation have bans on harmful chemicals in cosmetic products. Some New York State lawmakers feel it's time for New York to take action through legislation. Assemblymember Deborah Glick, a Democrat representing parts of Manhattan and a lead sponsor of the Beauty Justice Act, stresses that limiting the use of harmful chemicals has significant benefits.
There are so many chemicals in our environment, and we think of that as being out there and not right in here in our homes. And yet many of these forever chemicals are in products that we use every day for personal care, cosmetics, etc.
The Beauty Justice Act would ban and restrict the sale of personal care products containing chemicals such as heavy metals like lead, parabens, PFAS or forever chemicals, formaldehyde, benzene, asbestos, and more. Some environmental advocates say this legislation would go a long way in getting these chemicals out of the environment and better safeguarding public health. Rob Hayes, the Clean Water Director with Environmental Advocates New York, highlights that many other states and countries already ban these kinds of chemicals for good reason.
Every toxic chemical banned through the Beauty Justice Act has already been banned in another political jurisdiction. The European Union, California, Washington, they are way ahead of us when it comes to protecting people from really dangerous exposure.
According to numerous studies from the National Library of Medicine, harmful carcinogenic chemicals like asbestos and benzene are shown to increase the risk of cancers, respiratory conditions, neurological disorders, and endocrine disruptions. Steve Zhu, a medical professor at Northwestern and a dermatologist, says some cosmetic products can also cause serious harms to consumer skin.
There's a lot of skin lightening creams with very, very powerful corticosteroids that are not sort of trapped in cotton. That can lead to skin atrophy, skin bleaching. So that's kind of a serious thing.
And product consumers aren't the only individuals who could be hurt by toxic chemicals in products. Hairstylists who have extended exposure to products can also be in harm's way. Kelly Brunina, owner of Bombshell Hair Salon in downtown Albany, says she only uses clean products in her studio because of extended exposure concerns.
It's important to me that everybody's comfortable, that we're using products that's super, super clean.
Brunina gets a variety of clean brands, including some from Europe, which is much more heavily regulated in cosmetic safety. Bobby Wilding, the executive director of Clean and Healthy, says the data around exposure effects is unfortunately unsurprising.
Companies don't get the spotlight shown on them, and hair companies, I think, have avoided the spotlight for a long time. They do whatever they want. They do whatever is still legal. And that's why it's so important to pass laws like this, because it's shameful that this is required to change the marketplace, but it's really the only thing that ever really has.
Wilding stresses that most consumers are completely unaware these kinds of ingredients are in their everyday cosmetic products and that they can be harmful to their health.
I mean, frankly, it's sickening to me, right? Like, it makes me feel sick to my stomach to think about these products that people think of as benign and in fact beneficial to them that they're using every day.
Dawn Dotson, a regular consumer of beauty products, says it's unsurprising most consumers are unaware of the chemicals in their everyday beauty products.
It's not surprising because I think a lot of people don't have the opportunity to educate themselves on it or the funds to often be educated about it or the availability. So I do think it should be more accessible to everyone.
She says for her, she thinks about the safety of products a lot, and shopping often causes her anxiety. Zhu also says while the data out there demonstrates links to serious health concerns, there is more data needed to get a full picture of the harms from chemicals in cosmetics.
It's hard because there's no smoking gun in cosmetics, right? Imagine these products are being used by millions of people, billions of times a year, small, rare things that can be caused by others, and it just becomes a little bit of a difficult kind of mess. So I think that's where like investing in regulatory science, great databases, right? Forcing manufacturers to report adverse events, asking for higher levels of quality in manufacturing, improving the way we do inspections.
According to a study Zhu co-authored on the National Library of Medicine, reporting adverse events from cosmetics has increased since 2004. However, investigations are slow and the level of reporting is lacking. Advocates for the bill add that another issue with some of these chemicals in beauty products is the disproportionate effects for women and communities of color. Assemblymember Micael Salaj is a Democrat representing parts of Nassau County and the chair of the Black, Puerto Rican, Hispanic, and Asian Legislative Caucus, says this bill could make an important step to address this injustice.
We believe that legislation is going to create a level playing field for communities of colors like ours who are getting the brunt end of these chemicals put into our bodies.
In a recent study, Consumer Reports scientists tested 10 popular synthetic hair braiding products, and the results showed that 100% of the products had cancer-causing carcinogens. The results also showed detected lead in 9 out of the 10 tested products. Solange says hair braiding is a protective style for individuals and is an important part of Black culture. She says it's disappointing that cosmetic companies and manufacturers are using these toxic chemicals.
These companies are purposely poisoning us for the almighty dollar. And it's disheartening to know that they're not taking steps to ensure that these chemicals are not put into our beauty products. And so if they're not willing to do it, then we as a legislature have to center the health of our communities.
Alexander Groves, a senior policy counsel for Consumer Reports, stresses the effects from these products on women and young girls are significant.
Braiding hair is applied for 1 or more months at a time. So you're talking about prolonged exposure for women and girls. Many girls, 9, 10, wear these for years in their hair. It's attached to your scalp. So the effects of these chemicals are serious.
State Senator Leah Webb, a Democrat representing Binghamton and a lead sponsor of the bill, says it's the state's responsibility to protect New Yorkers from exposures to public health harms.
we have to put more guardrails in to make sure that our community members are not being exposed to these well-documented toxic chemicals that are creating long-term effects.
The legislation has gone through a number of versions since its first introduction in 2019. However, it has failed to pass both chambers. During the most recent legislative session at the state capitol, the bill passed the Senate but died in the Assembly. Assemblymember Glick says environmental bills always face some resistance in the legislature, especially when the state budget goes into overtime. This year's state budget was more than a month late. While the bill has bipartisan support, some lawmakers oppose the bill because of concerns about costs for consumers and businesses. State Senator George Borrello, a Republican representing parts of the Finger Lakes, voted no on the bill. The senator says it goes against federal actions.
You're going to just drive people over the border to buy what they want. And again, these are consumer items that are widely used nationally and internationally and have been tested time and time again, particularly by the federal government. So the fact that New York State is going to create some new draconian standard, it's going to just increase costs, reduce choice, and ultimately increase cost to taxpayers to enforce these things.
While there are some regulations around interstate commerce, the FDA is currently not required by law to approve cosmetic products or ingredients within those products other than color additives before they enter the marketplace. Zhu says at the national level there have been some steps, such as the passing of a federal law in 2023 requiring cosmetic manufacturers to disclose negative effects of their products. However, Zhu says cosmetics have been and largely continue to be self-regulated.
The nature of it is that we have done a little better. It's still really largely a self-regulated industry, and we are less rigorous in Europe.
Some state lawmakers, like Senator Roxanne Prasad, a Democrat representing parts of Brooklyn, says she doesn't understand why some lawmakers voted no, saying at the end of the day, health is more important than industry interests.
It's something that's adversely affecting the health of your constituents. I think you should think about it. It's not, it's not about, oh my God, we're hurting the industry. No, we're taking care of the health outcomes of our constituents, and that's most important to me.
Dotson says for her, paying a little more for a product is worth it if it's safer.
I guess it is expensive, but I also think that we only have one body. So we replace our cars, we replace our shoes, but we don't get to replace our bodies. So the more we take care of it, the better.
Bernina says the cost of clean hair products is not significantly more, and it also gives the consumer more use.
They will last you much longer because there's less filler, there's less plastics, less silicones. So you're using less product, which actually extends the life of the product that you're using.
Bernina adds cleaner hair products produce better results and healthier hair and skin.
You also won't feel that you need to wash your hair with a clarifying shampoo, or it starts to feel like buildup, and then you wash your hair with anything and it feels better after that. There's never that buildup that happens, so you don't have to wash it away to get rid of the plastic silicones. That's what gives you that, silky feeling, and then eventually you feel like your hair is never clean, and that is buildup.
The bill also has opposition from groups like the Personal Care Products Council and the Business Council of New York State. Ken Bukowski, the vice president of the Business Council of New York State, says they feel the bill could be more consistent with other states' legislation that are regulating these chemicals already, like California.
We've opposed the bill as drafted, but industry has made specific recommendations how we think the bill could be made more clear, more effective, more workable, more certain for the regulated community.
Bukowski says the recommendations include consistency with other jurisdictions and make the mandates more manageable by taking out bans on trace elements. Senator Webb argues the legislation is modeled on other states like California, Washington, and also the European Union, and that the bill balances businesses' concerns in addition to prioritizing public health.
We've been working with the actual industry leaders in the beauty industry on this bill, having conversations, trying to figure out, okay, from the science standpoint, I want to be very clear, what are the levels, what are those chemical reactions that lead to byproducts that may not have been intentional? How do we, put in guardrails for that? All of those things are part of this legislation.
The bill also includes a provision to allow businesses a timeline to adjust manufacturing. The legislation states that by January 1st of 2028, the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation would make available to the industry a list of safer alternatives to restricted substances for product formulation. Companies would then have a year to adjust their manufacturing before January 1st, 2029, when the ban would go into effect. Helen Nwosu, Vice President of Social Impact at Pros, says as a clean beauty brand, they would like to see the industry improve their standards. She says retrofitting products to safer materials may be challenging, but worth it.
For me, it's not about the cost, it's about the impact and the impact on the planet and the people, right? And I think companies should think about that because it could be, by changing the ingredients, we're going to see down the line some changes in human health.
The next legislative session starts in January. The bill sponsors Webb and Glick say during this off-session time, they are focused on educating their colleagues and constituents about the importance of the bill. At this point, it's unclear if the bill will be more successful next year. However, lawmakers seem determined to keep fighting. And for more information about the state's actions in the most recent legislative session, you can visit our website. That's at nynow.org. Well, that does it for this week's edition of New York Now. Thank you for tuning in, and see you next week.
Funding for New York Now is provided by WNET,